Imagine being one decision away from losing World War II. Not to Hitler, not to the Nazis, but to your own allies. January 1945. Germany is on its knees. Victory is so close you can taste it. But in a secret meeting room, the Supreme Commander of Allied forces is holding resignation letters from his top generals. Mass walkout, alliance collapse, war over, but not the way anyone planned. The man who caused this crisis? Britain's most decorated field marshal. The man trying to fix it? America's most patient general, Dwight Eisenhower. This is the story of how one press conference almost destroyed the Western alliance, how ego became more dangerous than enemy fire, and how the fate of millions hung on a single impossible decision. Stay with me, because what happened next changed history forever. December 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Hitler launches his final desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. 19,000 Americans will die in those frozen woods. Thousands more wounded, captured, missing. It's chaos. It's hell. It's the bloodiest battle American forces will fight in the entire war. But the Americans hold. They dig in. They fight back. They survive. And then, January 7th, 1945. The press conference that changed everything. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery stands before a room full of reporters. Cameras flash, pencils scratch on notepads. The world is listening. What does Montgomery say? He claims he saved the Americans. He describes finding American forces in disarray. He talks about how he organized the defense. He makes it sound like American generals panicked and British leadership rescued them.
Listen to how veterans described hearing this news. It felt like getting shot. Not by the Germans, by our own side. Think about that. You've just survived the Ardennes meat grinder. You've watched your friends die in the snow. You've held the line against impossible odds. And now some British general is on the radio telling the world that you needed saving? That your commanders panicked? That without him you would have lost? The volcanic reaction. The American reaction wasn't just angry, it was volcanic. Newspapers exploded with fury. Veterans organizations demanded answers. But most dangerous of all? General Omar Bradley walked into Eisenhower's office and put his resignation letter on the desk. Not a threat, an actual resignation letter. Bradley said, "I will not continue serving under a command structure that allows such insults." But Bradley wasn't alone. George Patton heard about Montgomery's claims and immediately told Bradley, "If you resign, I resign with you." Think about what that means. The two most successful American generals in Europe, the men who broke out of Normandy, liberated France, and were now driving into Germany, both willing to walk away. And they weren't bluffing. Other American commanders supported them. The entire American command structure was on the verge of collapse, and if the American generals walked, the alliance would shatter, the war would stall, millions more would die, all because of one press conference. Montgomery's apology. Here's where it gets even interesting. Montgomery's own chief of staff, Major General Freddie de Guingand, flew to Eisenhower's headquarters. What he learned made his blood run cold. Eisenhower had already drafted relief orders. Montgomery was hours away from being fired. De Guingand raced back to Montgomery and told him the brutal truth. Your career is over, unless you apologize right now. So Montgomery wrote an apology, January 8, 1945. But here's the thing, he didn't apologize because he thought he was wrong. He apologized because he was about to lose everything. The apology prevented Montgomery from being fired, but it did nothing to restore trust. The damage was done. The Americans would never forget. And Montgomery, he was about to make everything infinitely worse.
The temporary arrangement. During the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive had split the American front in two. Eisenhower made a tactical decision, temporarily placed two American armies under Montgomery's command. the U.S. First Army under General Courtney Hodges, the U.S. Ninth Army under General William Simpson, combined over 500,000 American soldiers. The arrangement made sense at the time. Montgomery's headquarters was closer to the northern sector. He could coordinate the defense more effectively until the crisis passed. Everyone understood this was temporary, emergency measures for an emergency situation. Except Montgomery. Montgomery's master plan. Montgomery looked at those two American armies and saw opportunity. In his mind, he'd just proven that when Americans got into trouble, they needed British command to save them. The press conference had been clumsy, sure, but the underlying message was true, wasn't it? So 2 days after his forced apology, Montgomery walked into Supreme Headquarters and made his demand. Keep First Army and Ninth Army under his command, permanently. His argument? Military logic. The broad front strategy was wasting resources. American armies in the South were making limited progress. Everything should be concentrated for one massive thrust in the North, under unified command, his command. He needed both armies because British forces were exhausted after 5 years of war. Canadian forces were under strength. American manpower was essential. Without these armies, his offensive would fail. With them, he could end the war by May. It sounded reasonable. It sounded strategic. It sounded like a professional military assessment. But American generals saw something very different. The security blanket. General Simpson commanded the Ninth Army, 300,000 men, professional soldiers, combat veterans. They'd fought across France, through Belgium, and now into Germany. Simpson's officers called Montgomery's demand being held hostage. Why? Because Montgomery didn't trust American methods. He needed these armies as his security blanket, American strength to compensate for British exhaustion. For 5 years, the British Empire had bled. North Africa, Italy, France. They'd been fighting since 1939. Their manpower was depleted, their resources stretched thin. Montgomery needed American muscle, but he wanted to command it using British methods, careful, methodical, slow. The Americans had a different approach. Hit hard, move fast, exploit weakness, don't give the enemy time to recover. 2 philosophies, 2 nations, 1 alliance hanging by a thread.
Bradley's line in the sand. When Montgomery presented his demand, Eisenhower listened without interrupting, stone-faced, taking it all in. Then he gave his response. No. The command arrangement was always temporary. The armies will return to American command. Montgomery's face went cold. This was a mistake, a political decision overruling military logic. But Bradley had already made his position crystal clear. If Montgomery keeps those armies permanently, I will not accept it. I will not serve as an army group commander without armies to command. I will not watch Montgomery use American troops to pursue British strategic objectives while taking credit for American victories. Bradley's position was firm. These were his armies. He'd commanded them since Normandy. Eisenhower's decision to temporarily place them under Montgomery during the Bulge had been operationally sensible. Making it permanent was politically impossible. And then there was Patton. George Patton, the warrior general who'd saved Bastogne during the Bulge, the man who'd turned an entire army 90 degrees in a blizzard and smashed into the German flank. Patton heard about Montgomery's demand, and his response was immediate. I resign alongside Bradley. For Patton, this was personal. His Third Army had done the heavy lifting during the Bulge. His soldiers had died by the thousands. His aggressive tactics had broken the German offensive. And now Montgomery wanted credit?
Wanted to command American armies? Wanted to impose his slow, cautious methods on American troops? Patton called Montgomery an incompetent egomaniac. He told Bradley, "My warriors will not spend their blood for that man's reputation." Now, put yourself in Eisenhower's shoes. You're the supreme Allied commander. Your mission is to defeat Nazi Germany. You're months, maybe weeks from final victory, and your command structure is imploding. Bradley's threatening to resign. Patton's threatening to resign. Other American generals are lining up behind them. If Bradley walks, they all walk. But you also can't just fire Montgomery. Britain is your closest ally. Churchill's government depends on British military success. Destroying Montgomery destroys the alliance from the other direction. You need American generals to win the war, but you need the British alliance to maintain political support.
Bradley's line in the sand. When Montgomery presented his demand, Eisenhower listened without interrupting, stone-faced, taking it all in. Then he gave his response. No. The command arrangement was always temporary. The armies will return to American command. Montgomery's face went cold. This was a mistake, a political decision overruling military logic. But Bradley had already made his position crystal clear. If Montgomery keeps those armies permanently, I will not accept it. I will not serve as an army group commander without armies to command. I will not watch Montgomery use American troops to pursue British strategic objectives while taking credit for American victories. Bradley's position was firm. These were his armies. He'd commanded them since Normandy. Eisenhower's decision to temporarily place them under Montgomery during the Bulge had been operationally sensible. Making it permanent was politically impossible. And then there was Patton. George Patton, the warrior general who'd saved Bastogne during the Bulge, the man who'd turned an entire army 90 degrees in a blizzard and smashed into the German flank. Patton heard about Montgomery's demand, and his response was immediate. I resign alongside Bradley. For Patton, this was personal. His Third Army had done the heavy lifting during the Bulge. His soldiers had died by the thousands. His aggressive tactics had broken the German offensive. And now Montgomery wanted credit? Wanted to command American armies? Wanted to impose his slow, cautious methods on American troops? Patton called Montgomery an incompetent egomaniac. He told Bradley, "My warriors will not spend their blood for that man's reputation." Now, put yourself in Eisenhower's shoes. You're the supreme Allied commander. Your mission is to defeat Nazi Germany. You're months, maybe weeks from final victory, and your command structure is imploding. Bradley's threatening to resign. Patton's threatening to resign. Other American generals are lining up behind them. If Bradley walks, they all walk. But you also can't just fire Montgomery. Britain is your closest ally. Churchill's government depends on British military success. Destroying Montgomery destroys the alliance from the other direction. You need American generals to win the war, but you need the British alliance to maintain political support.
Montgomery protested that planning long-term operations required knowing his force structure. Eisenhower repeated, "The decision is final." Montgomery understood what was being offered. Accept this reduced compromise or lose both armies immediately. Keep one army temporarily or command only British and Canadian forces for the rest of the war. He had no choice. He accepted. On January 17, 1945, 1st Army officially returned to Bradley's 12th Army Group.
General Hodges now reported to Bradley, not Montgomery. Bradley was satisfied with this part of the compromise. He got his largest army back. Montgomery's authority over American forces was reduced to one army for one operation. But Bradley wasn't satisfied with Montgomery keeping Ninth Army even temporarily. He believed Montgomery would use the Rhine crossing to argue for extended command. He believed Montgomery would find reasons to delay returning the army. He told Eisenhower, "Watch Montgomery carefully." Eisenhower's response, "The decision is made. Montgomery needs Ninth Army for the Rhine crossing. After that operation, the army returns, period." Bradley didn't know it yet, but his suspicions would prove absolutely correct. Montgomery spent February and March planning Operation Plunder, the assault across the Rhine River. It would be the largest river crossing of the war. Massive artillery bombardment, 2 airborne divisions dropped behind German lines, Ninth Army as the southern prong of the attack. Simpson's Ninth Army worked closely with Montgomery's staff. Simpson respected Montgomery's organizational skills and thoroughness. The planning was meticulous, every detail anticipated. This was Montgomery's strength, preparing set-piece operations where nothing was left to chance. But Ninth Army officers noticed something troubling. Montgomery's staff talked about operations beyond the Rhine as if Ninth Army would remain under British command. Plans for advancing into northern Germany included Ninth Army forces. No one mentioned the army returning to American command after the crossing. The plans didn't just ignore Bradley, they treated Ninth Army as a permanent fixture of the British 21st Army Group. When Simpson's officers raised concerns, they were told Eisenhower would handle it after the Rhine was crossed. Montgomery was already planning his next move. March 22, 1945. Patton's Third Army reached the Rhine near Oppenheim. Within hours, elements of Third Army were across the river. Patton called Bradley immediately. His instructions were specific. "Tell the world we're across. I want the world to know Third Army made it before Monty starts his engines." Patton's crossing was opportunistic. He saw a weakly defended section of river and attacked immediately. No massive preparation, no elaborate planning, just rapid exploitation of German weakness. This was American mobile warfare doctrine in its purest form. See weakness, hit hard, move fast.
Montgomery heard about Patton's crossing and was furious. This was typical American recklessness. The Rhine required proper preparation. Patton had gotten lucky. But Patton had proven something crucial. The Rhine could be crossed without Montgomery's elaborate preparations. American methods worked. The warrior had beaten the politician by one day. Operation Plunder launched on March 23, 1945. Over 300,000 Allied troops participated. Ninth Army attacked from the southern sector. British and Canadian forces attacked from the north. Massive artillery support. Airborne divisions seized key positions. Engineers constructed bridges under fire. The operation succeeded. Montgomery's forces crossed the Rhine and established a substantial bridgehead. German resistance was heavy, but Allied strength was overwhelming. By March 25th, forces were advancing beyond the river into Germany. Montgomery declared the operation a complete success. Perfect execution. The northern route into Germany was open. American newspapers noted that Patton had crossed first, with fewer casualties and less preparation. Operation Plunder was impressive, but it followed Patton's proof that the Rhine could be taken rapidly. Simpson's Ninth Army performed excellently during the operation. American troops had done much of the fighting. Montgomery praised their performance. And then he told his staff, "The Army is essential for operations beyond the Rhine."
After the Rhine crossing, Montgomery's staff submitted operational plans for advancing into northern Germany. The plans included Ninth Army forces. Montgomery argued that removing Ninth Army now would disrupt operations already underway. He told Eisenhower that the Ruhr encirclement required continued unity of command. Ninth Army was positioned to complete the encirclement from the south. Transferring the army to American command in the middle of the operation would be militarily foolish. It was exactly what Patton had predicted. Montgomery was using operational necessity to extend his command of Ninth Army indefinitely. Every operation led to another that supposedly required keeping the army under British command. Bradley told Eisenhower, "The time has come. Montgomery had his Rhine crossing. The operation was successful. Now return the army as promised." Eisenhower agreed. On April 4, 1945, Ninth Army officially returned to Bradley's 12th Army Group. The transfer was final. Montgomery commanded only British and Canadian forces for the rest of the war. Montgomery protested to Churchill. This would ruin his advance into northern Germany. Ninth Army had been essential to every operation since the Rhine crossing. Taking it away now made no military sense. Churchill did not intervene. The political cost of fighting this battle was too high. Britain's influence over Allied strategy had been declining since D-Day. This was the final admission. American forces would be commanded by Americans. Simpson's Ninth Army continued advancing into Germany under Bradley's direction. They linked up with Soviet forces at the Elbe River in April. The army Montgomery desperately wanted to keep played its role in the final victory under American command. Montgomery's 21st Army Group advanced into northern Germany and the Netherlands with only British and Canadian forces. They liberated the Dutch population. They captured German ports. They accepted the surrender of German forces in their sector on May 4th. But Montgomery was commanding only Commonwealth forces. His vision of leading a massive Allied thrust to Berlin had died in January when Eisenhower took First Army away. Looking back, Eisenhower's compromise wasn't just a political bridge, it was a strategic trap. By letting Montgomery keep one army temporarily, Eisenhower proved that even with American strength, Montgomery's methodical approach was slower than American mobile warfare. Patton crossed the Rhine first. American armies advanced faster into Germany. Montgomery with Ninth Army still couldn't match Patton's speed. The gamble of giving Montgomery one last chance with Ninth Army was risky. 4 months earlier, Montgomery's Operation Market Garden had failed disastrously. Montgomery had called that failure 90% successful and faced no consequences. Eisenhower was betting Montgomery had learned from that disaster. He hadn't. When Montgomery tried to keep Ninth Army permanently after the Rhine crossing, Eisenhower had justification to take it away. Montgomery had been given his chance. He'd gotten his elaborate operation. Now American armies would finish the war under American command using American operational methods. In the end, Montgomery's vision of a great northern thrust to Berlin didn't die in a German ambush. It died in a press room. By choosing his ego over the alliance, Montgomery lost the trust of the men he needed most. Eisenhower gave him enough rope to hang himself, and Montgomery used every inch of it. Coalition warfare requires trust. Montgomery destroyed that trust with one press conference. Eisenhower gave him one last chance with Ninth Army. Montgomery tried to exploit it. He lost everything. The question for us today: how often do we see leaders destroy themselves not through enemy action, but through their own ego? How many alliances crumble not from external pressure, but from internal pride?
Montgomery had the armies, he had the resources, he had the opportunity. But he didn't have the wisdom to know when to be humble. And in the end, that cost him everything. If this story taught you something about leadership, ego, and the price of arrogance, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and drop a comment. Do you think Eisenhower handled this correctly, or should he have fired Montgomery immediately? See you in the next one.